Hi everyone, I'm Laura Bayless from Pyre, and this is the third video in the strategic planning video series. In the last video, we covered selecting our CDC suicide prevention strategy, and in this video, we'll identify local conditions that need to change to enact that strategy. So remember in the first video, we discussed that the problem of practice is often, by its definition, a wicked problem. So for this reason, there are many different evidence-based interventions that we could select to impact that problem. And with suicide prevention, we know that the CDC technical package is full of strategies and approaches to prevent suicide. So the goal of the logic model is to support coalitions in narrowing down the possible interventions so they can select one that has the greatest potential to drive positive outcomes for suicide prevention. The best intervention for any given community is the one that is the best fit for that community. And there are three criteria we think about when we're establishing fit: relevance, appropriateness, and effectiveness. This graphic from SAMHSA depicts why it's important for community-based groups to focus on the local conditions at play when selecting their evidence-based intervention. So this graphic was geared towards substance use and misuse prevention, but it's relevant to suicide prevention or really any other problem of practice. So as we can see in the relevant column, a first key step is to localize the data by identifying the risk and protective factors and contributing factors to ensure that the intervention selects positive outcomes. As such, the third step in creating a logic model is to specifically state what local conditions need to change to drive positive outcomes. So here's where we'll use local data from the Phase 4 Needs Assessment and Environmental Scan to further tease out what could be done in the community to move the needle on the selected strategy and approach. So one way to think about how the logic model works is to think of it as a chain reaction of a series of events. So we start broadly with our problem of practice. Then we ask ourselves, why do we have this problem here? And that leads us to identify a CDC strategy. The strategy is a really good starting point, but to know what to actually implement in the community, we need to think deeper. So then we ask ourselves, what about this CD strategy should we be addressing in our community? That leads us to using our data to identify a CDC approach. Once we have the approach identified, we need to think deeper again. So we ask ourselves, what part of our local conditions need to change in order to drive positive outcomes for suicide prevention? And that's where this data comes in. Once we have a data-based understanding of what the community's needs are, then we can select a strategy that has a high likelihood of moving the needle on our selected problem of practice. And in turn, that data point becomes something we can measure. So it's a short-term outcome, and it supports us in selecting our evidence-based intervention. So the third exercise this video covers will support the Phase 5 team in identifying local conditions. First, we're going to review what you did in the last step when you looked at your coalition's Phase 4 work and identified the approach that's necessary for your community. So remember, when you selected that approach, your team had to review data. Think about what data point led your group to select the CDC approach that you chose. And then we'll phrase that in a similar way to how we phrased our problem of practice. So this allows us to identify a local condition that we must change in order to impact the problem of practice. When we're laser focused on a local condition, we can then select the best evidence-based intervention to implement in the community. So building on what we learned in step 1, the power of our logic model is that it's the backbone of outcomes-driven strategic planning. So for this reason, we add in data, of course, and our data source to articulate our local conditions. So here's an example based on our Cardinal County that we've been giving examples of throughout. And then the final step is to put it all together in 1 to 2 sentences, and of course, cite your data source to back up your data and your statement. So here's the example. This describes the local conditions because it includes the local condition highlighted in yellow, the data highlighted in green, and the data source highlighted in pink. This statement has 85 words, so again, it can be pretty short and sweet. Your turn, so go ahead and complete the table that you'll find in your worksheet. And then, congratulations, you will have completed the left side of the logic model. So this is the end of Module 3, and once you've completed this step, you can move on to Module 4, where you will complete the right side of the logic model by identifying the outcomes to measure.